Being Black in America comes with its challenges. However, we understand that enlightenment through education is the oppressor's worst fear. By bridging the gap between academia and the people, our purpose is to equip you with knowledge that breaks down barriers during your journey towards truth and freedom. Welcome to the Black and Highly Dangerous Podcast.
Yo, Dad, what's up? What's up? How's it going?
You know, it's going well. Just recently got back from the third stop on my, summer vacation tour. Went to Seattle to see family, John's sister, his niece, or our niece just had her or is having her first communion, which is a really big deal in the Catholic faith. And so we went to see them and just spend time with family. And it was really fun.
Nice. I never been to Seattle. How is it? Is that your first time out there? You've been out there before?
No, I've been out there before. It's really nice. They actually live out in like a suburb outside of Seattle. So the first time we went, I actually did get to see Seattle a little bit more. We were, at the wharf and we have really delicious seafood, which, Seattle is known for. And they have just really, really great restaurants. And this time we spent more time out in that suburban area, but it was fun. I have to say, though, I think I came to the realization that I just cannot hang with John's family because his parents, his mom just turned 61, his dad is 65. They party more than me. I was tired. Every day. It was a party. It was a celebration. It was mimosas. I was just like, look, y'all, I'm too old for this.
Oh man, they got Daphne feeling real old high when you can't out party the parents. That's funny.
Yes. And because I told you we went to Houston, a couple weeks ago, and it was to see them, and it was the same thing. We went out to breakfast. His dad is like, yes, they want mimosas. I'm like, but I didn't say I want mimosas. They want mimosas. I was just like, okay. So I just always have to be like in ready mode when I'm about to hang out with them.
Yeah, John's family sound like my kind of people. So we can kick it whenever. That's funny.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. Like I said, that's what my parents got in town yesterday. So they're in town this week, which is wonderful, because they just spent a lot of time with the grandbaby. So frees up me and Kristen just, to have some independence again, whether it's small things or big things like going out to eat or just, kind of doing what we want to do around the house without having to worry about the baby 24/7. It's been good. So we're happy. They're happy. So that's what we've been doing this week. I don't have too much, no meetings, no consulting this week. So with the parents in town, take advantage of that. Just kind of get some R&R and, hang out a little bit. But that, because, that's rare nowadays. So I'm just going to take full advantage of that this week.
I know. I'm pretty sure that is rare. What is the one activity or just restaurant or whatever it is that you're looking forward to doing with Kristen?
I would say probably, definitely going out to eat and getting some drinks. It's been a while since we've been able to do that. Like since the baby's been born, really. And really, actually, before that, I think about it, because before that, Kristen was also pregnant. So then, almost once you're pregnant, you're not doing any drinking. So it's probably almost been 2 years since we actually like kind of went out and just had a good time. So that's definitely something that's been missed, at least on my end for sure. So I'm looking forward to at least going out. I think we're going out Thursday night, get out, go to a restaurant, have a few drinks and just, enjoy each other's time once again.
Yes. And I hope you guys, since the baby will be with your parents, I hope you guys truly can relax and, really, take in that moment that you have.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Looking forward to that. So good week. Any more trips on the horizon, or you got some time before the next one?
Oh no, I leave in 2 days for Orlando for an adult Disney trip. No kids, just fun.
That's actually kind of nice. I haven't been to Disney since I was a teenager, but it would be cool to go back again as an adult and just have the full experience for yourself.
Yeah,
so that should be fun.
Yeah, I don't actually know how often they do this, but for 2 nights that we'll be there, I think we'll be at Hollywood Studios. There's some park that has like this special event to where you can arrive at like 3 or 4 p.m. and the park essentially closes down to anyone that they don't have these special tickets, where the lines are really short.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all you can eat food and drink.
Mm.
And I think it's for adults only. And it's
Mm.
for 2 days.
Oh,
So
wow.
Friday night and Saturday night. And so we have these special tickets. So yeah, I think they'd maybe do it once or twice a year.
Mm. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
now you're gonna send me the details on that one. That sounds like a good time. Shut it down just for adults. And I mean, I was sold at the shorter lines because if y'all ever been to Disney, you know them lines can be really long. So anything that gets you to the rides quicker is definitely a plus.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, it's glad to hear everything's going good and summer's starting off good for everyone. Hopefully, the same goes for our listeners as well. Let's get to some Olor news, and then we will introduce today's special guest.
Hello, and welcome to BHD News, where we give you the most current and eye-opening Olor news of the week. Join us as we present news that'll make you want to say,
Okay, so over the past few weeks, businesses and the CDC and etc. have been rolling back restrictions, related to travel, related to, mask wearing and etc. But Tyrell, some people just aren't ready.
Mm-mm.
There have been like multiple fights over the past few weeks on different airlines. Like, have you seen those little videos?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well, there have been. And one flight in particular took place on May 23rd when a Southwest passenger was arrested on suspicion of felony battery after she struck a flight attendant during a flight from Sacramento to San Diego.
Mm.
Now, this passenger messed it up for everyone because Southwest was originally supposed to resume food and beverage service, but in particular alcohol service in June. But now they have decided that they will not be serving alcohol on flights because folks don't know how to act.
Mm-mm-mm. There's one person mess it up for everybody. It's like when you in school, you got that one's classmate that mess it up for everybody. You on a sports team, you got that one teammate that do the same thing and make everybody run sprints because they acting full. That's how it seems like this one. But I'm surprised Southwest, took that big move because of one or two incidences like that. But I guess it is, makes sense to be on the safe side, but it does ruin the experience for everyone else who look forward to those little drinks.
Yeah. Especially because airlines such as American and United, like, they aren't even really serving food and beverage. Like, United gave us like these little snack bags and it seemed like they did it for everyone. But on American, they were like, we don't serve food and drinks. So, people been like looking forward to like food and beverage on flight. So
Yeah,
get their life together.
Yeah, these airlines are on the come up because these plane tickets are really expensive, and everybody they've been fully booked. And now I'm sort of saving costs by not serving food and beverages, so it's like they're making a lot of money right now, which is crazy. I've been seeing a lot of headlines about that, and people just looking for tickets. I know my brother's trying to get out here in July for my aunt's wedding. He just been talking about these ticket prices like looking crazy. I know me and Chris have been looking because we have to go to a wedding in North Carolina in the fall, and like it. I would say, what is it? To go from Jersey, North Carolina, tickets usually around a little less than $200 because it's a short flight.
Mm-hmm.
Them things are like $600 right now.
Oh,
like,
wow.
Yeah, we're going to wait a little bit or we might drive. Take the 8-hour drive.
If you're going to drive, be sure you book that rental car early, or unless you're going to drive your own car.
Probably drive our own car. I know the rental cars have been crazy.
There have been shortages with the different fleets for the rental car companies. So either they've been completely booked or the prices have been astronomical. So crazy.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, we're gonna weigh our options, but if these tickets price stay the same, it's not worth $1,200 to fly to North Carolina. Like it's not. It'll probably cost about $100 in gas money to get there. So that's definitely more affordable.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Okay, got two quick little stories, but they are both fairly crazy if you ask me. So, a Massachusetts elementary school teacher has recently been fired after he was exposed as a white nationalist writer.
Wow.
Yes, the teacher, would post under various pseudonyms on different like white nationalist sites, describing himself as a racial realist, of course, talking about critical race theory in a negative way. Just craziness. He said that he got radicalized in the Navy when he saw the way, I guess, white sailors were treated by black sailors. And then when he went into academia and felt like there was like this left-wing agenda, etc. But he was exposed by a group of researchers called the Anonymous Comrades Collective. And they did research on him and ended up exposing him in the Huffington Post.
Wow. Seeing I feel like we, as of late, maybe it's the past year or so, we've seen a lot more stories like this, where these folks are getting discovered about their white supremacist ways, and the writings and things they do comes to light. And it just sucks because it's just like how long have you been in these positions, and how have you influenced the lives of other folks, particularly people of color, when you've been in certain positions. So it's glad that we find these folks, but it's also worrying to see like there's still probably a whole bunch of other folks in these positions that are unknown and are still doing damage.
Because he taught social studies. I mean, that was one of the subjects that he taught. And like, think about the spin he may have been putting on that, or the things he may not have been teaching. So.
Yeah, that's wild.
Okay, so another school-related story really quickly. You've heard of Juilliard? Well, the school is under fire because they forced students to take part in what they called Slavery Saturday. And it was a workshop where students were required to pretend that they were slaves amid audio of whips, rain, and racial slurs.
Why are we still doing this nonsense? Like, it's just not a fun game. It's nothing to play with. I don't understand. Again, if people were asked to do other replay or roles of certain things like the Holocaust, except it wouldn't even be fathomable. But for some reason, we see people like to play with race like this, slavery, and think it's fun to recreate these really, really horrific events. So that's just crazy.
Very crazy. Juilliard has since apologized, but of course the damage has already been done. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for folks, if you want to go to, a better, a place that might be more culturally competent, you can go to, I know Howard just recently renamed their College of Fine Arts after Chadwick Boseman, and I think Felicia Rashad is now the new dean as well.
Yeah, I heard about that.
So, there's, different place outside of Juilliard's other places you can go to.
Absolutely.
That won't play these slavery games for sure.
Well, those were my Oh Lord news stories. You have anything?
Okay, yeah, I got a couple things that came out. One quick one is that Texas lawmakers passed a bill that allows residents to carry handguns without a permit. So folks out there in Texas, be careful. I don't know why these states are just making it harder to vote, but they're making it easier to get guns. It doesn't add up to me, but this is the kind of country we live in at the time. Another one is that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signs a social media censorship bill into law.
What? What's that?
Yeah. He signed. So this piece of legislation, I think last Monday, it cracks down on what they say he calls media censorship. This bill is in response to his beliefs that social media platforms are censoring conservatives. I think largely after what, we've seen platforms do with Trump and others. And I think there was another politician who got banned because they were just spreading like false information. And so now he's really, he said, I think that introduces a $250,000 fine per day against platforms that suspend the account of political figures. We'll see how this plays out. I'm sure he's not going to be the first to do this. I think this, people have this big question of freedom of speech conversations and what is allowed and what's not allowed. But again, these are also companies, and they do have the power to do what they want. So is it really censorship? Is it not? I don't know. I do like how when Twitter started to at least indicate when lies were being told on the tweets. And I feel like they should at least keep doing that with politicians. But, I'm not mad either if these people are saying like ridiculous, extreme things or inciting riots and you want to remove them off your platform and not so they don't have to use it for that way. So I don't know. I think this is the first of many conversations we're going to see of this, but I think it's worth mentioning.
This just feels so targeted and not in a good way.
No, not at all. Not at all. But something to keep an eye on nonetheless, because, we already know the power of social media. And we've seen with the Capitol riots, how that way was forged through Trump. And we also know that the GOP stopped the bill to actually create a commission to investigate this same Capitol riot.
Yep.
So I don't know. This political structure is getting crazy. I know it's been, but it's just getting wild now, how polarizing things are and how extreme the right is getting with some of these measures. So we shall see. I know another, talking about the First Amendment and Fourth Amendment, the Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, is being sued because she was limiting one-on-one interviews to only journalists of color. And a right-wing news site, the Daily Caller, is suing Lightfoot and claims that she's violating the First and Fourth Amendment because she published a letter a week ago pretty much saying that condemning the Chicago media, saying that the media is she in quotes, overwhelmingly whiteness and maleness. And I think there was an event, her 2-year anniversary. And so I think at the event, she said she only wants to speak to Black and brown reporters and trying to increase diversity and fight for diversity and inclusion. And of course, these white folks are mad at that. So it's a Black woman who says, so I know she's being sued for that. Again, it's weird because nobody ever kind of bats an eye when I'm sure she says it's because she sat in rooms with reporters and it's probably been all white and all white males and no one has had an issue. But now she's like, oh, okay, I want to do it to just only Black folks and give them opportunity. Now there's an issue. So I'm not sure if anything will fully come from this because it wasn't like she said, I'm only going to talk to Black and brown reporters forever. It was just particularly for this one event. So I'm not sure how much weight that has. And I'm sure people can choose who they want to talk to and not talk to, but I don't know. I'm sure people do that all the time, but that was interesting as well.
Yes, it's interesting that, this is receiving backlash because I was listening to an NPR podcast and they were talking about the military civilian divide and how I think it was in like 2017 or 2018, General Kelly gave a White House press conference and the only reporters that he allowed to ask him questions were those who were either Gold Star family members. So like they, had a family member who passed in the process of serving in the military. And so no other reporters were allowed to like ask him any questions. So it's been done before. And
like I said, it's usually nobody bats an eye when it's the other way around. So I mean, kudos to Mayor Lightfoot for taking that stance and seeing there's an issue and saying, hey, I'm gonna give y'all this opportunity to get some play. And so when people want to hear about this story, they have to go to either Black journalists to read it or Black outlets to read it, which I think is commendable. I'm not mad at it. But we know these white folks get mad at stuff like that. So it is what it is. And finally, I saw this headline talking about how Biden administration suggests school districts should implement a free anti-racist therapy for white educators to combat institutionalized racism. I know we've talked about things like critical race theory and stuff like that, especially on last week's episode of our Clubhouse discussion and how folks are trying to remove it. And now we see the president trying to encourage school districts to spend up, $200 billion within the $200 billion of COVID relief funds to put towards anti-racist therapy. I don't know why they call it therapy. It's kind of weird to me. I don't know if there's some kind of spin in the language with that, but essentially it's supposed to be teaching them evidence-based interventions that responds to students' needs and academic and social and emotional needs and stuff like that within the education system for students of color. So I thought that was interesting, and we'll see if, people will move in that direction, because we know there's a lot of folks opposing this, but we'll see if funds actually get put towards that.
Yeah, we shall see. And I guess depending on who's in the White House in, 2025, this could very well be rolled back again. So who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are things to think about on a grander scale too. Yeah, if we see what's coming up on the right wing sector, and if we get one of those folks in office again, we know they're going to jeopardize a lot of this, attack things like critical race theory, and we'll try to remove it from our education system, which again just holds progress and makes it more damaging for kids that look like us. So I don't know, worrisome, but hopefully that's not the case. But we know, I keep seeing reports every day about how all these states are still rolling back, making it harder to vote. I think 16 states now have implemented things mainly for mail-in votes and stuff like that. But I think a lot of folks, I think we'll see the damages in this upcoming midterms. See the effects of this stuff. Okay, so today's special guest we have coming is Dr. Nadia Brown, who is now recently a full professor at the Department of Government and the director of Women and Gender Studies at Georgetown University. She recently has migrated over from Purdue to Georgetown. So with tenure, congrats to Dr. Brown for doing that. That was a big accomplishment on her end. Absolutely. And she's here today, to talk to us about really her work, her book, Sisters in the Statehouse, and her new book, a recent book, Sister Styles, The Politics of Appearance for Black Women Political Elites. So a lot of her work centers on Black women in politics and intersectionality. And so this is what a lot of our conversation speaks to today, which I think is definitely very, very relevant.
Very relevant. In addition to talking about her, books with an S, we see why she is a full professor. We also talk about the political issues impacting Black women, and we talk about generational differences and how Black women's appearances matter. I think we also have a really cool conversation about expectations versus reality in terms of electing Black women legislators and what that all means. In terms of moving beyond, what we expect and what we actually get when we do so. It
was a really, really fun conversation. So we're glad to have her on. We're glad that you all can listen and learn and become enlightened from her as much as we did. So without further ado, let's get Dr. Brown on and we'll catch up with y'all afterwards. For today's episode, we welcome Dr. Nadia Brown, a full professor in the Department of Government and the director of Women's and Gender Studies program at Georgetown University. During the episode, we discuss her book, Sisters in the Statehouse, Black Women and Legislative Decision-Making, which argues for the importance of intersectionality in politics. We also have a conversation about pressing political issues impacting Black women, as well as her recent book, Sister Style, The Politics of Appearance for Black Women Political Elites, which provides insight into the political ramifications of Black women's physical appearance. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Very happy to have you on.
Yes. This is great for several reasons. We have, Daphne and I both went to Purdue as well. So there's some overlap in time there. Okay. From your bio, I know through the email exchange, we've both found out we're both from New Jersey, right? Yes. Both products of HBCU. So a lot of great overlap here. So I'm sure this conversation will be fruitful, to say the least.
Exactly. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things we like to start off with our guests is just to give you the floor to kind of give us a little background information about yourself. Tell our listeners who you are.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am a Jersey girl, very, very proud. Although I'm living here in the Midwest, I still rep Jersey hard. I am a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and I am a graduate of Howard University, repping the real HU always. Oh. I had to throw that in there.
Of course.
And I'm a proud academic mama. I have 3 little girls, the ages 5, 3, and 1. And we're just out here trying to live our best lives before we head back to the East Coast. So in July, I'll be starting a new position at Georgetown University.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's really exciting. And, I just admire you for holding it down, like publishing all of these books with 3 kids at 5 and under. You are a super woman.
Thank you, Daphne.
But it's great to hear a little bit more about who you are personally, and we really want to get into who you are professionally. I know you study politics, and so what sparked your interest in that, and in particular, exploring women in politics.
Sure. So the shortest answer is that my interest in politics, and particularly Black politics and Black women's politics, came from my upbringing in Jersey. So my brother and I are 11 months apart, which means we essentially grew up like twins. And I noticed that my mother treated him so much differently than me, right? So I had to do all the housework, and Nick could go out and play with his friends. And this was basically me becoming a nascent feminist, right? I was like this burgeoning feminist because I just couldn't understand. We grew up the same, and then we hit puberty, and I had to have a completely different set of responsibilities and be held accountable in ways that he wasn't because he was a boy. And fast forward, we go to Howard University together, and the same is true, right? So Nick gets different types of things than I get at Howard because he was a boy. And there was concern that if he didn't have a car or have access to money, that he might get into trouble that ways that I wouldn't have. And it was like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. So like, this is kind of like me piecing things together to say like, I'm a girl, I should be able to have these same things and privileges and luxuries when actually we look the same on paper, right? So there's nothing that, he's on the dean's list, I'm on the dean's list. Why does he get rewarded in these ways that I don't? And it was really because there was this very strong patriarchal view that boys needed certain things and then girls needed to be prepared for the world in other kinds of ways. And then I got interested in politics because David Dinkins became the mayor of New York City, the first and only Black mayor, when I was really young. I was in 4th grade. And my grandfather, who, as a product of the Great Migration, traveled from South Carolina to New York City and then later settled in New Jersey, and our family in New Jersey, left the South, Jim Crow South, under violence and very racist duress. And he always reminded my brother and I that getting an education, there's nothing that a white person can't take. White people will take everything they can from you, but not an education. And he turned on the TV so that my brother and I could watch David Dinkins being sworn in and to say, like, look at what this Black man is doing. And you can aspire to do some of these things too, to help other Black people. And I was in awe. And I remember watching David Dinkins being sworn in and being mesmerized and just listening to my grandfather's stories and seeing these connections to politics. My brother, on the other hand, was like, when can I get up and go play? But I wanted to sit and ask all these questions. And so that's what got me interested in politics. And I initially thought I would be a politician. My first semester at Howard told me no, like this is not the route I need to go, primarily because in my community, I thought to be a politician, you had to be a lawyer. And I took con law class and was like, oh, memorizing case law, this is not for me. So I was so interested in politics, but didn't know what else to do. But I recognized my junior year that you could be a professor. I did this Ralph Budd Summer Institute program, which is a pipeline program for minority students to get a PhD in political science. And I was like, yo, this is what I want to do. I love academia. I love campus life. I never want to leave. I really felt at home when I set foot on Howard's campus the first day. And when I realized I could get paid to like read books and learn and study politics and to write things that were what I wish I would have had a chance to learn, basically is Black women's politics. And this is the point when I realized I was a Black feminist. It's like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I want to write about Black women politicians who I saw in a distance, but didn't really have the opportunity to have close interactions with. But I recognized that they probably had similar experiences, and they did. And I wanted to study them, talk to them, and understand what drove them to want to get involved in politics.
That's great. And I have a quick follow-up question. Because you definitely shared, how your personal journey was. And then I'm curious to know kind of how that motivation lies today, particularly because you mentioned earlier that you have 3 daughters, right?
Uh-huh.
And I also have my first child. She's a daughter, 6 months old as well.
Congratulations.
And so thank you. So we know that, having children sometimes changes your outlook on life, changes your motivations. And I know the work already resonated with you and motivated you because from a personal reasons. Now, has that been enhanced because you now have 3 young Black daughters moving forward? And how does that work with your research and your agenda?
Yeah, so it's definitely shaped them because I've had to become much more intentional around my feminism and explaining things to them. So I knew from the bat that I wanted to come in. And my partner, Brian, who's also a Howard grad, had to throw that out there too. We deep in here. So we really wanted to instill self-confidence and love and self-love as a radical sense of Black girl power, right? For a Black feminist ideology in them. My eldest is exhibiting signs that she's gender queer. And so this has also pushed me to think about ways that I had come to talk about Black feminism as really an essentialist kind of claim about what Black women do, what Black girls can do. And now my oldest is pushing me to talk about what Black feminisms look like and envisioning a holistic community for Black folks, one that's centered in liberation and freedom, radical joy and self-love, and doing so without these kind of normative claims to one's personhood and body. And I'd already kind of gotten interested in particularly Black queer theory when I started writing the first book and thinking about some of the limitations of Black feminisms when people don't consider themselves feminist or say that they are feminist, although they're adhering to these Black feminist lenses. And so that's really helped me to become a much more intentional scholar as I'm trying to teach this to my kids. So I'm sure you'll get to this point too, where you start saying stuff and you recognize that they have no prior at all. So I said something about Bill Cosby, and of course they have no idea of Bill Cosby, right? They haven't watched the Cosby Show. They don't know Jell-O pudding pops, all the things that kids of the 80s grew up with. But I was they don't know this, right? So my discussion of them around Black women's bodies and agency and understanding their lived realities and truthfulness, and using Bill Cosby as an example, even a lighthearted, flippant one, this is why we can't watch Bill Cosby anymore. They were I don't know. What does that mean? And I had to really break you honestly have no idea. And so it makes me go back and try to explain things in much more simplistic terms that's meeting people where they are. And I can't tell you how impactful that skill has been, because, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later on when we start talking about my book on hair, but I had white folks just ask them straight up questions about Black hair that made me recognize that I need to walk folks back to here is step 1 or step -1, because they don't know. And the same thing with my kids, stuff that we take for granted that people come to the conversation with, they just don't have.
No, I definitely appreciate that. And I think, let's start getting into some of your work. Looking at your CV, looking at your just publication output is phenomenal, right? You are definitely prolific scholar and all those great things. And so we would need days, maybe even weeks to talk about all your work. We're going to try to keep it concise for our listeners. And so one of your earlier seminal works is your book, Sisters in the Statehouse, Black Women in Legislative Decision Making. So I want to talk about this for a little bit before we get to your more recent work. One of the things that stood out to me in the book, kind of what you discuss in the first chapter, is that you make the argument that we need to move away from kind of descriptive representation in politics and adopt this more intersectional approach. So can you explain to our listeners why the intersectionality and intersectional approach is
better?
Sure. So the argument is that we have to think about the complicated ways that people's identities get created and shift and change and alter over time. And at some places, like some identities are more important, but then also they're filtered in different ways through other kind of identities. So the example that I use in class for my students is a real example of I went to a Target in a very ritzy suburb of Indianapolis where we don't live, but I went to this Target with my first daughter, and I think she might have like been one at the time, and I was pregnant with the second. And it was like it was like maybe 2:00 or 3:00 in the afternoon. And I tried a headband on her and did all my shopping and, checked out, but recognized that we had stolen this headband that I had walking around my baby's head in the Target that I just didn't pay for. And we were walking out to the car. So paid for my bags and had done all the things. But there was a group of young, like teenagers, maybe high school or middle school, Black kids that were also in the Target that were being followed by security. And I heard on some Target employees' walkie-talkie that they were stealing and they were walking to the parking lot. So I looked down and I recognized my baby I have her in this baby bee on this baby carrier. So she's on me the whole time. I'm just not paying attention as much, right? I'm like, oh shit. I'm sorry. I cussed. I guess okay. But I was like, oh shit. I stole this headband from Target. And the security guards are rushing out and I'm thinking they're coming for me and my baby, but they're coming for these other Black kids that are leaving, or teenagers that are leaving the Target. I literally stole, and I don't know if the teenagers stole. But I mean, so it shows like the complicatedness of we're both, like the teenagers and myself were Black. But at this time, right, my Black womanness, particularly my Black motherhood, makes me seem very much more in the norm at Target at that time, right? So I am probably just any other, suburban mom with a young kid at Target, even though we're Black. But my Blackness never leaves, right? Because I'm scared as hell when I see the security guards because, right, as a Black person growing up, you're always cognizant of surveillance and being surveilled on the police. But that they were actually after these youth, right? These teenagers, and that my identity is then shifting in some ways because I'm not seen as threatening. Now, I don't know if these teenagers stole or not, right? I have no clue, but they were read as guilty in these ways, although we're sharing this very racialized identity. And I understand the fear and the anxiety that they had. I also note that I did not walk back into this Target and take the headband off and give it to the customer service desk because I was so scared that we were all being run in the space as being transgressive, right? That Black folks did not belong in this very ritzy Carmel, the suburb of Indianapolis Target, because we would do things like steal. Although, again, like I definitely did, walk out of Target with this headband. So it's just an example to share like that at different times and spaces, identities are doing different things, but they are mediated and read in different ways by the outside, people that are looking in. So the security guards and the sales clerk at Target, but also ourselves, right? Because I had a moment of fear when I heard security, they stole, and you hear people running in the background. Then, when I get to the car and I am like kind of taking a debrief, trying to get the kid in the car seat, these white women are, going about their day-to-day business like nothing ever happened, right? They're not looking to see where the teenagers ran. They're not checking and turning around to see where did the security officers go. This is just completely commonplace. Like they were oblivious to this. This was kind of like they're the fish in the water, and that's just something that they expect to see happen. Or Black kids flee from a Target for possibly stealing. And the same is true in politics, right? So we are to come into thinking that Black representatives will all act the same way, that they will see legislation in the same way, that they will try to represent communities, Black communities in the same way. It's not the case, right? And so sometimes for Black legislators, It might be their motherhood status that enables them to look at policies different ways. It might be that they are queer. It might be that they are native of a different, they're immigrants. They might be have different nativity, or that they are, have grown up in poverty and they mediate their policy preferences in different ways. And to lump all Black folks together to say they experience things the same way, we know that's just not the case, right? So like my target experience that day was totally different than these Black kids. And the same goes true for legislators, right? Their experience in the legislature, while there might have some overlap in how they see politics and policy, it's not necessarily all the same because they're Black.
Does that speak to, because I know in this particular work, it led to the development of the representational identity theory.
Mm-hmm.
And, is that what you're speaking to in terms of like different identities in different ways, and it shapes representation or how they represent their citizens in different ways?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right on, Daphne. So what the representational identity theory tries to put forth is that because of culture and racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, all different forms of capitalism and the ways in which we treat people that are differently abled, identities have been crystallized in some ways, but they're fluid and change depending on context. And what I really wanted to advance in this theory is that we should pay attention to what solidifies group identity, but also how people might be peeled off from group identity depending on the context. So like a real world example of this might be, or a recent example of this might be, why is it that Black women overwhelmingly, like at 98%, 96%, vote for the Democrats and in presidential elections, and Black men have been peeling off in growing numbers and voting for Republicans? So it's still a high number, right? Like 80, 87%, 88%, sometimes 93% of Black men are voting for Democrats. But what are this other percentage that is voting for Republicans? And so if Black Americans all have the same racialized identity because of racism, what perhaps might be the work of gender in some places? And if gender then mixed with class in some ways, right? So might this explain why Ice Cube and Diddy, 50 were pushing for Trump in ways because they were upper class Black men who also were undereducated, right? Like, can this speak to a population? Like, so looking at these identities, not just by saying, what's up with Black men, but looking at some of these other identities that these Black men have might explain their vote choice.
I think I can definitely agree. I know all the answers aren't there yet. I know folks are probably still researching and analyzing, but on the onset, to me, it does look like a class thing. Right. Even when I do work in Newark with some of the guys, and when Trump was first running in 2016, we had conversations. These are guys who are just as involved, and about like who were they thinking of leaning towards, politics, all that kind of stuff. And I was surprised that a lot of them were okay or supportive of Trump. More, not a lot, but probably about a third or so, more than I definitely expected. But a lot of it had to do with business, the reasons, just economy, and they felt that he's a businessman and he makes money and they could relate to that, and that's something they aspire to be. And so I think this is kind of class, financial, economic element plays a role for sure. And I'm sure down the line we'll get more answers to that. So an additional question kind of to what Daph was asking is, how does this representational identity theory relate to legislative decision making? Kind of what does this look like in real life?
Yeah. So for my work, I find that Black women usually arrive at they usually vote the same. And if we're only looking at votes, like how people cast their votes, the yays or nays, we miss the political calculus behind why someone does something. And that's where we really see this representational identity theory. So for example, since in the Statehouse, I share instances where Black women vote the same and where they vote differently. And one of the places where they vote differently, or vote the same, but talk about how they voted differently, comes down to these different salient identities. So in the book, I give an example of women talking about it from the same community, because they ran in multi-member districts, talking about why the state should fund or give money to funding youth centers. And some people that were mothers thought of this as like, oh, this is a good place for my kid to go between, after school from the hours of like 3:30 until 6 until I can get home. Keep them safe, keep them out of trouble. There'll be someone there that'll be watching them do homework help. Other folks who came to support this bill that were in business and come from the business sector were saying it's so great to have Black youth go somewhere and not be on the streets, because between the time that school is out and people usually come home from work, or it just gets kids off the street because people don't want to come into my business if they're seeing people loitering. And usually if kids don't have any place to go, they're going to hang out around the pizza shop or wherever else. Right? And they don't want to come. Other people that are shopping might not want to come into my business. Another person who had a family member, I don't remember the relationship, but one family member one had died of gun violence and another one was drug addicted, felt that their family members got in these precarious situations because they didn't have anything to structure their time. So if they would have had a youth center, they wouldn't have hung out on the block and got them mixed up in the wrong crowd. If there was a basketball, like a basketball hoop at somebody who was putting on a league or something, that probably would have occupied some people's time and they wouldn't have, found some negative things to do. So all these women decide that they want to vote for this bill, but they do so because of different political calculus. And that political calculus was based on their own identities, right? Things that they brought to bear, their own experiences helped them to make these decisions. And so this theory gives us room to make sense of how people are thinking through bills based on their personal background.
Thank you for that. One thing that you just mentioned, you talked about how, Black women, they show up for the Democratic Party. And in a C-SPAN interview, you also mentioned that Black women are more likely to vote for other Black women. So they show up for other Black women. And I think some questions that are starting to be raised now is the loyalty paying off? Like, are Black women getting a return on their commitment or their work and effort toward electing certain people? And so, particularly when it comes to, Black women legislators and politicians in general, are they meeting the expectations of Black women once they get in office?
Yeah. So I think it's a complicated question because on the surface, people might say yes, right? Because look, you have Kamala Harris, the first Black woman or South Asian woman to be elected to vice president. And the Democratic Party really woke up this election cycle and recognized that because of the pushing of Black women within formal politics and those outside, they really needed to be beholden to their most loyal demographic groups. And we see this also reflected in the Biden-Harris administration. So the large numbers of really Black women, the administration has not done as well in kind of nominating Latinx women. But they have really pushed for much more diversity within this cabinet. And so the Democratic Party, I think, really took stock of some of the reasons why Hillary Clinton lost. And I've argued with others that the Democratic Party was too beholden to the establishment and was trying to do too much of a piecemeal to reaching out to marginalized groups and not just go ahead and nominate people of marginalized groups to represent themselves. But on the other hand, right, the research that I do shows that Black women that I talk to believe that the party is doing too little, and sometimes they are too late in reaching out to them. That they have to do that Black women candidates they do so much on their own without party support. So whether it's raising money, it's getting their name out there, it's trying to find candidate training programs or relying on networks. These are things that the party should be doing, particularly at the local levels, at the grassroots levels, and they're not. So that's upsetting, but also the silver lining to this is that Black women, when they run and they win, they do it without party support. So they don't they would benefit from having it, but they don't necessarily need it. And it shows that Black women get stuff done on a shoestring budget. There is one woman that I spoke to who shared that she would throw these little tiny fundraisers with maybe like $50, $25 in her pocket to put on a fundraiser. So she'd ask a girlfriend, a sorority sister, a church member if they would host a fundraiser at their house. She would go and buy she'd go and buy refreshments, punch, graham crackers, or whatever, and that would be it. And she'd come away with $250, $300, which is nothing, peanuts. But that's how she ran her campaign, and that's how she won. But she, in turn, isn't beholden to the party, right? Because the party didn't invest in her. She doesn't have to kind of follow the party line. She could just say, like, basically, what have you done for me? But we know that that's problematic, right? This is a story that says, it can be done, but it shouldn't have to be done this way. And we know that Black communities are not socialized in philanthropy, that it's something, or just political donations, right? We beat the drum of vote, vote, vote. People died for you to vote. Think about John Lewis. Think about the civil rights movement. But the mother's milk of politics is money. And if people don't have money, and particularly women of color, are more likely not to have well-funded campaigns, they're not going to do as well. So we see more women have run, particularly this election cycle, particularly more women of color, but they're doing so under circumstances that, quite frankly, white men don't have to do. And I can just imagine if women of color and Black women specifically were given the same kind of resources, a Black women's political agenda would be front and center in not just national politics, but mostly where we need it, which is state and local politics.
No, that's real. And that was a lot to digest. And I appreciate Daph asking that question about C-SPAN too, because I did watch the interview as well. And I just appreciate how you were able to hold it together a lot during those questions. It was very clear when they allowed the folks to call in, the demographics of folks who were calling in, the questions they were asking, especially when they started asking about, like, what about Candace Owens and stuff like that? That's all good. Right. Here we go.
Yeah, they're not screened, right? So I don't know I have no idea who's gonna ask a question.
I was like, oh boy, once I started hearing the questions coming, I'm like, okay, they're clearly not screening, in the direction you would like them to. So you're getting all kinds of questions, but you held it down. And so a little follow-up to Daph's question as well. I do appreciate the fact of you highlighting kind of sometimes the undervaluing of Black women when it comes to running in politics within the party, the resilience still they show to win in these positions, especially garnishing support from their community. But typically, generally speaking, what are some of those major political issues that they usually advocate for on their platforms when running?
Sure. So Black women are somewhat unique that they have, and this is across partisanship, have a consistent kind of political agenda. And it's expanding access to healthcare, expanding access to education, and economic development. And so these are things that are usually seen as typical like civil rights issues, and that other marginalized groups also champion, but Black women do so with a different flair, a different kind of attention. So if we just look at an overarching, these are the three topics that Black women tend to prioritize, so do Black men, and sometimes so do Latinx officials. But Black women speak of these issues in deeply holistic ways. So economic justice is also tied to racial justice, right? It's tied to environmental clean jobs. It's oftentimes tied to dignity, giving people a working wage, a livable wage. That's also tied to education is tied to early childhood education and development, and putting resources into making sure that all families have access. And again, this stems, this kind of connects partisanship, so that women that are both Republicans and Democrats seem to prioritize these issues as well. But Black women are thinking about holistic communities, not just these as single issue. We want better jobs, but it's like, well, what do better jobs look like? And how are they sustainable? Are they good for our communities in ways that it's not just bringing in a power plant that will perhaps pollute our community, but are these jobs that people can actually build a growing family and live in the community where the jobs are located?
Yeah, I feel like that gets us into your new book because Sister Style: The Politics of Appearance for Black Women, Political Elites. And in the introduction, I remember you highlighted a quote from Angela Davis about, the impact of Black women and our ability to, just think more broadly and get things done for the community and taken on the different perspectives of a bunch of different groups. And it kind of serves us well in being able to think about and serve the community.
Yeah, yeah. And so so this is something that I think it takes doing qualitative research to really pull out, because again, on the surface, most Black women who are elected are Democrats. So they tend to vote the same way. But talking to elected officials, you hear them talk about issues in these holistic ways that if we are doing qualitative research, you're just checking a box, right? Like, is this economic, is this, good for the economy, but without thinking about how is this connected to justice for communities. So I guess throwing back to the Sisters in the Statehouse, there's a chapter on anti-domestic violence legislation where Black women are thinking about what does expunging the record do. And so feminists, and read white feminists when I'm saying this, feminists are saying that they don't want a record expunged of people who have been accused of domestic violence. And there are arguments for that, right? Because we know that people who commit domestic violence and the survivor tries to involve law enforcement might not follow through, right? They might not take this case to court for a host of reasons, right? Usually being scared or intimidated by the victim, by the perpetrator. Or also, we know that our communities are already over-policed and they just want that immediate danger to end, but they don't want to invite the state into their house, right? To take away their children, possibly, and all sorts of things. So the Black women in my chapter push back on this, and they say, well, what does having a permanent mark on someone's record for a claim that hasn't gone through the court system, what does this do to Black communities? So it's taking this out of just thinking about the survivor and the perpetrator, but Black communities in general. So if people haven't had a claim substantiated against them in a court of law, that person's name might be searchable on a database as having a claim of domestic violence filed against them. That person might not be able to apply for a job if an employer looks and says, this is not the kind of person I want to represent my business. They might not hire them. And then what does that do for Black communities? It adds to the levels of unemployment in Black communities. And that's not good for anyone. It's not taking a side on whether domestic violence happened or is it good or bad, but it's thinking about the unintentional consequences of these very binary policies. And these are the kind of questions that Black women bring, right? And I'm not saying that other legislators don't, but Black women bring a deep lived experience, particularly of policing and domestic violence, to this kind of legislation, where they're able to intimately know who things hurt and who might be unintentionally propped up from these kind of claims. And that's why it's so important to have people from different backgrounds in the state legislature. My focus, or any legislature, right? My focus is on Black women. But I will consistently argue that it's so important for people from all walks of life to have a voice, because if not, what we see now is that our legislatures are overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly upper middle class, if not wealthy, elite, right? And they don't share the same kind of lived experiences and relationships to problems and hardships that others do. And if they're the ones who are legislating, if they're the ones who are making policies for the rest of us and have never, ever walked a day in our shoes, they have no idea how they will actually help or hurt people. And sometimes it's malicious, right? I think that some policies are punitive for communities of colors, and some people are well-intentioned and literally have no idea why this is a bad policy because they've never talked to our communities, let alone walk a day in our shoes.
Yes, preach. That is so true. um, so, in thinking about like the importance of the Black woman perspective in politics, where does your new book, Sister Style, fit in that conversation? Like, what was your motivation for this book?
Oh, okay. So in some ways, this book is, arguing back against my sisters in the Statehouse, where I'm like, Black women are much more complicated than just even the things that I teased out and talking about, like motherhood and, nativity, immigration status, sexual orientation. But they experience politics differently because of what they look like. And Black women can never forget what they look like because the world won't let us. And so this book came from also another personal journey where in graduate school. So when I was an undergrad, I had like gone natural, and then I relaxed my hair, and I like kept going back and forth. And then in graduate school, I really wanted to go natural. And and my dissertation advisor, I had a co-chair of the dissertation, told me I can't go on the market with. Sorry, those are my kids slumping upstairs. I don't know if you can hear that. But anyway, so my dissertation co-chair told me that I couldn't go on the job market with natural hair, that I was already studying a scary topic, Black feminism, and I would just scare people away if I had natural hair. But in the same breath, she said, but, I'm petite and I smile a lot, so it might balance out. And that stuck with me. That really stuck with me. And I didn't stop relaxing my hair until I was leaving my first job. And that job was so horrible that I was like, I need to find some sense of who I am again. And that was one of the things. And then I locked my hair during the first year when my daughter was born. And that was the best decision I ever made, my first daughter. It was also part of my journey to help to self-love and acceptance. But this really came when I was talking with a state senator who was maybe a couple years older than me, maybe 3 or 4 years older than me. And she was the one who really encouraged me to just go. She was like, girl, go ahead and just do it. And having that really easy banter with her was one of the first recognitions of how easy it was to talk to Black women legislators about this, and that this should really be a study. And in hindsight, this is the same way that I got interested in the project. It was another younger Black woman delegate, state delegate, who was telling me she was the only, well, there's lots of other women who were natural in the Statehouse. She was the only one who wore her hair out with twists or in a fro, but didn't add hair or wigs. And that she was unapologetically like, I'm rocking my natural hair. And I asked her about that, and she's like, "Oh yeah, there's lots of them, right? There's lots of Black women in the Statehouse who are natural. They just don't wear their hair out." But this was in like 2011 or maybe 2010. So right, the natural movement wasn't a thing like it is now, and so that might have been on the cusp of this. So perhaps that explains it. But anyway, but legislators were sharing with me is that they experience differences in how people treat them based on what they look like, and their hair is a big part of it. So one legislator shared with me that people, particularly white men Republicans who were in power, would not talk to her, wouldn't talk. They didn't even see her, right? Like she was just invisible. And she recognized that when she changed her hair, white people would come over and ask her, how did she get her hair done? Or how was it like that? Or compliment her. And she, flipped that into, oh yeah, thank you for the compliment. But now let me tell you about my bill. Let me tell you about this policy I'm working on. Let me tell you about one of my constituents who need this thing. And that was her entry point into drawing in her colleagues who would otherwise have ignored her. And that was a strategy she used by changing her hair to entice people, her colleagues, to really to want to work with her. Other legislators shared with me that they had pushback from constituents who didn't want to see a candidate or then later on elected official with natural hair, that they thought it looked more professional to have straight hair. and right, and kind of why that was, and kind of really teasing out these intergroup differences, right? How Black folks talk to other Black folks about respectability politics, right? Like, what should you look like, and why is straight hair still seen as the gold standard when a majority of women in the state house do not have relaxed hair. But it's not just young women. I spoke to two women whose stories stick out. One woman has had alopecia or has alopecia and went bald, and she was like, here was my statement, right? Like, I would come to the state capitol with, any latest new hairstyle. And now she can't because she has no hair. So shoes have become her thing. So now, she wears a bunch of different kind of shoes, and that's what gets people's attention. Another woman talked to me about having menopause and having hot flashes and spending a lot of time and money in beauty salons only to have a hot flash a couple hours later and the hairstyle will be ruined. So she decided to cut off all her hair and just wear it really close cropped to her scalp. And after she went through menopause, just never went back because she said all the time, it freed her up from having to spend time and money sitting in, salon chairs when she could just go to a barbershop and be in and out in 20, 30 minutes. So, so that these women have talked about their hair as having impacts to their legislative portfolio, but then also how constituents see them, how other Black people are talking to them about their hair, people that are well-intentioned, right? That people who want to help them, but are really pushing really Eurocentric visions of what Black women should look like, or others who are saying, have your natural hair, wear it in ways that you like, don't make it political, and think about ways that you might have natural hair and what district you're running in might be a benefit for you. So these are just some of the calculations that Black women are having in politics around their hair. And we know that voters are saying the same thing. So voters are assessing Black women by their hair and also by their skin tone and saying, these are what we think these women will do once they get in office because of what they look like.
Yeah, no, that's all interesting, right? And one, I'm definitely going to tell my wife, because ever since we've had our child, she's always been talking about now locking her hair for the same reasons that you did. So I'll let her know that you found it extremely helpful. Then two, I kind of want to just, get a little bit more elaboration on the voters' responses to this, because, Daphne and I have had tons of conversations on this very podcast, especially during all the presidential debates and the wide range of candidates that we've had, and just generally at large when Michelle Obama was first lady and in office, and kind of just the overall, the public response and Black Twitter's response, right, to certain hairstyles and the way things situated, and the way Black women were looking in these big political stages. So, like, how do voters respond to that? Does it influence a lot, a little bit? Are there specific kind of nuances that folks maybe not be familiar with that you'd like to share?
Sure. So what voters, we've done, my co-author, Danielle Lemmy, and I did some experiments, and really, like, Danielle is the sophisticated, quantitative whiz kid guru here. So this is all her. I'm the qualitative researcher who's an interpretivist. So I'm like, let me sit and make meaning of people's stories. But when we did this, the experiments, what we found is that Black women were most likely to support other Black women candidates, regardless of their hair or phenotype, but that Black women saw but that all Black voters saw Black women with darker skin as more Afrocentric and more likely to adhere to a kind of like a Black political agenda. And that Black women said that they were more favorable to Black women with darker skin and natural hair, but that they were more reluctant sometimes to vote for them because they were thinking, oh, as Black people do, right? We saw this with Joe Biden, right? Like, Black people want to vote for a candidate that think that other Black people are going to vote for. And so that's what we saw right in Joe Biden in South Carolina. So what we know is that doing a study of the headshots of all Black women who ran for office in 2018, that most Black women who run are lighter skinned, and therefore that's who's going to win if that's your population. But that hair acceptability kind of varies by region, and so in some places having braids or locks is just the thing that people do, right? So like in the South and in the Northeast. And in other places, like in the West, right, it's not as common. And so voters might just be socialized into what they see these candidates, kind of what these Black women candidates look like in those regions. And those that don't fall within those norms, they're unlikely to vote for. But this doesn't mean that they're, I don't want to leave on a discouraging note. It doesn't mean that that is primarily what voters are looking at. It is a heuristic. It's a shortcut that voters use to place on Black women. But voters are very astute, and they are looking at Black women's politics and policies and deciding how to vote and who to vote for.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that kind of stood out to me. You have a quote that talks about Black women with African features have faced uniquely racialized and gendered history in the United States. And it's clear that, that extends to politics as well. Yeah. And I think as I was reading, it made me think about my own experiences as a dark-skinned Black woman. And how I do feel like, knowing how others might perceive me, that shapes the choices I make, which, oftentimes it is wearing my hair straight because I feel like my skin tone already reads as I'm blackity black, y'all.
Right.
So, how would it look if, I get my sister locks, which I'm, really thinking about and, how that changes how people perceive me. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. It's again, like the disconnect between we all do these things as Black women in our day-to-day lives, right? Like, so if my hair is big, do I want to put on like bright lipstick and the bright earrings, right? If I'm going to be around white folks, or do I want to like tone something down? Right. Like, so we do those things because it's our culture, right? We're taught to try to make white folks comfortable with us. And then even, right, some Black folks comfortable by what we have on. And so should not be surprising that this also happens in politics.
Speaking of like nuances, what Ty said, there also seems to potentially be some like nuances in terms of like generations, because like, certain hairstyles are, very like a millennial or Z thing versus like older generations. So, in terms of preferences, in terms of the diversity of representation among Black women, do you see differences in terms of generations?
Yeah, so there's definitely a generational difference that was very heavy throughout this book. And so millennials and Gen Zs were most likely to embrace having their natural hair and to want to present themselves. I'm talking of elected officials, wanted to present themselves to candidates with natural hair, and really pushing back against those that said you shouldn't have natural hair, and they just not understanding why. Or not saying understanding why, but they don't believe that they have to adhere to these respectability norms that older generations have. But it was also so interesting because these older generations were saying that they fought older generations to wear natural hair, right? So if you're thinking about women who are in their, maybe turning 40 and below, the people that they're pushing back against came of age in the 1970s and the Black Power movement in the 1970s and 1960s, and they were wearing afros, right? And so it's such an interesting dynamic where these women in politics are pushing to wear their twist outs or their box braids and be seen as professional, and their elders, those that are in their parents' generation are giving them advice on get elected first, then wear your hair any way you want to. Let the voters, and particularly white voters, see you as competent, then come out with whatever hair you want to have. And what these younger Black women are saying is, I'm coming out with the earrings, the hair, the nail polish, and all the things. And you should pay attention to what I'm saying and what I've done, my track record, as opposed to my hair. There are some differences, right? I don't want to paint this all with a broad brush, right? The women in my study who are lawyers have a much more conservative view of what hair should look like, and that's a byproduct of their profession, many of them have said. But then there are others who are also boomers and part of older generations who love the millennials' fashion sense and are encouraging. But a clear distinction that came up in all of the all of my chapters of the book, all of the qualitative chapters, where there's very, very clear generational split.
Yeah, I think that's important. I'm glad Daph asked that question. More importantly, I'm glad you all covered that in this book because as being a millennial myself and Daph, we have these conversations all the time, and even just talking to our parents and hearing some of the generational differences. Particularly, I think they were very apparent during the 2016 election. For me personally, shed a lot of light on like, okay, there's still a lot to be discussed here, even within our own community, just related to generations. So I think that's important to be covered. And I'm glad you did. So, we're going to kind of stop there from about your book content because why? Because we want people to go out and buy the books. So we want to give out all the gems out today and we want them to buy Black and participate in that. And
yes, and I'll definitely share. I'll email y'all a code if I haven't already, a discount code for 30% off the book.
Okay, great. And then we'll add that to the episode notes so our listeners can check that out too and get a nice discount. We appreciate that. One thing we like to do with all our guests is to, we've covered a lot this episode. I'm doing this interview. And is there anything that comes to mind that maybe we didn't cover that you would like to share with us or our listeners?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what we're seeing in politics today. I want to remind all of your listeners to support Black women, trust Black women, center Black women's voices and experiences. Thinking about my SOAR delegate, Stacey Plaskett, who spoke as one of the House managers for Donald Trump's impeachment earlier this week, and how she pushed back against the tropes of the angry Black woman that the Trump's defense attorney tried to paint her and other Black women with. As being angry because they were saying, fight for our communities, fight for our children, fight for justice, fight for equality. And it's not the same thing as fighting to overturn a certified election. But these are like the ways I want us to stay ever vigilant in how tropes and stereotypes of Black women get deployed. And because it's so deeply ingrained in our culture, the same way that our definitions of good and bad hair are ingrained in our culture, we don't even question them anymore, right? Like we know them, they're there, and we might, push back against them, but they are ever present. So I want to remind us all to stay vigilant, to trust Black women, support Black women, and do like Delegate Plaskett and call a spade when you see it, and don't allow for these tropes of Black womanhood to be propagated in politics without being called out.
Absolutely. And I love the theme of that, trust Black women. And if you read the book, you will see why. So how can people find you? Like you said, we'll put a discount code, but how can people find you, reach out to you, learn more about your work?
Sure. So I'm Brown, PhD girl on all social media platforms. My website is NadiaEBrownPhD.com. And starting August 1st, you'll find me at Georgetown University as the Director of Women's Studies and a full professor of government.
Yeah, shout out to that. For our audience, like the percentage of Black women and Black men who are like full professors, I don't even know if it's like 1%, huh?
Yeah, girl.
So shout out to you.
It is not a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's amazing accomplishments. Definitely Black excellence. So yeah, we appreciate you. We'll definitely tag the social media links and all that kind of stuff in the website to the episode notes. So our listeners, go ahead, click that stuff, follow it. It's important work that Dr. Brown is doing, and we will definitely be following her journey as she continues to push this conversation forward. And outside of that, I hope and pray that at least one of your children decide to go to Hampton University.
I rebuke that.
So if all our listeners could just say a prayer and say that Dr. Brown wanted her children to go to Hampton, that'll be helpful to me in my mission. But again, we appreciate you for coming to chat with us and for all the work you're doing, for sure. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, y'all. Thank you.
You too. Yo, Dad, so what do you think about Dr. Nadia Brown coming to chat with us about Black women and politics and all that entails?
I'm just like, I want to be like her when I grow up. Oh my God. Like that just, we talked about a lot of awesome things, but there was so much from the book. And like Tyrell mentioned on her CV that we just did not get to. Dr. Nadia Brown is Black excellence. And so one is just like having this conversation. I'm just like in awe of all, that she has accomplished and the rigor of her work. But it's just a really also personally interesting conversation given how it intersects with my identities.
I mean, yeah, that was, even though I don't share all the identities, but it was definitely good for me to read about this and hear about these experiences that a lot of my Black sisters go through and experience within the realm of politics and trying to represent our communities and how well they do it. And even just hearing about the lack of support from our own party, particularly when it comes to Black women, but how they're still able to thrive and get to these platforms and still make changes for our communities holistically and collectively. I think that shouldn't go understated as well. Like, it's just, I'm glad like she is one of the folks definitely leading the charge in this space.
I agree as well. Really awesome that, she's heading to Georgetown as a full professor. It's making me think about, I know you got a decision coming up soon. So, but I just think in general, this is an important conversation given the research that shows just how effective Black women are, like looking at things holistically and representing people, given their positionality. I said there, like I'm not a Black woman, given our positionality. And so, just really important work. And I think representation is just important in general. So in addition to Black women, just hopefully we can continue to diversify voices in our political arena because we definitely need it.
Yeah. And I appreciate too, when I was reading the book, her book, talking about sister style and the overlap between, like, we've had way early on professors on Watchie Willig and Wendy Green, right? Before like the Crown Act was even passed, they were already doing that work as legal scholars in that field of pushing for representation and just legal protections with natural hairstyles for Black people and Black women in particular. And then seeing the Crown Act and these conversations happening with these political spheres with folks like Dr. Nadia Brown, just like, how everything just comes full circle, right? And just shows you, again, the motivation and the resiliency of just Black women making sure that these conversations are heard and putting them on major platforms like Dr. Brown has been doing and others. So I'm always appreciative of that. And I'm sure, listeners, if you probably have picked on that sometimes Daphne and I get really excited when we have other academics on that are just doing great things. Cause like she said, this is kind of what we aspire to be one day. And I know a lot of folks who are not in academia may not understand all the nuances involved of like the kind of that work ethic and the publication records and all this kind of stuff and the reputation in the field and going to full professorship. Like that's a big, big deal, particularly for a Black woman doing what she's doing, becoming full professor and becoming a director of these spaces. I think it's just like, it just should not be taken lightly. So if you haven't gotten it from us, I hope you did feel that, this is something not to take lightly.
And not only like, given her identity, but given that, like she said, like her research to some people is scary because she is centering Black people and Black women. So yeah, this is amazing, y'all. Yeah, we geeking out over here.
Yeah, 100%. So like we always appreciate folks like Dr. Brown coming in again, because, for us, it means a lot for this platform and our podcast, because sometimes when folks do the work that she does, they get really big. Sometimes they get unreachable. And she was very, very approachable, very easy to reach, and very welcoming to come chat with us directly. So we never take that for granted either. So we appreciate Dr. Brown for taking time out of her busy life, professionally, personally, and all that kind of stuff to sit with us for a little bit of time to shed some light to us and all of our listeners. So really appreciate that. Like we said, during the interview, click on all her links, follow her on social media, follow all the work she's doing, watch all the media and all that kind of stuff, because she's only going up from here. It's going to be a lot of bigger and greater and better things she'll be doing, especially be located in DC. She's around all now these Black politicians, at least on a national level. So I'm sure her work will grow even more deeply. And after you do that, follow us on social media at BHD Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can visit our website, blackandhighlydangerous.com, the key of all our latest content. If you'd like to be a guest or have suggestions of guests or just have questions or topic ideas, send it our way, bhdpodcast@gmail.com. Then after you do that, go ahead and review and rate us on iTunes if you haven't done that yet. That really helps us out with the algorithm so that more people can find us. And after you do that, share us with your friends, share us with your family, share us with your enemies, and as always, continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.
If you're interested in continuing this and other conversations, visit our website, blackandhighlydangerous.com, to subscribe to our email list, suggest topics, and participate in our discussion forums.
Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at BHD Podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast on your favorite platform. And as always, continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.